Hello, good afternoon, good evening. I'm back in my thinking field again, my walking thinking field. I thought I'd just do some series of little videos as we're entering that period now, you know, the period leading up to the Passover. And I was thinking about some of the subjects I touched on in my book, Orion's Door, especially when you think about, I was talking about before, the relationship between the stars and the zodiac and the sun and the moon, and crucially some of the deeper significance to the goddess and the light. What kind of light? What kind of light are we referring to, especially when we look at some of the symbolism around Ostara and around Freya and all the other pagan interpretations of something that seems to be an energy that runs through the land. And it got me thinking about a couple of things recently. I've stumbled across some other subjects that was passed on to me relating to resurrection and death, which I'll touch on as well at some point in some other videos, or maybe at the end of this video. But it's interesting to note that with Orion, and I'll go back to the book Orion, when you think about Orion's position and the stars around Orion, and you think about the significance of that in relationship to the sun and the moon, and what's happening now in this period as we head towards Beltane, we have to go through the Passover in the month of Nisan, in the Hebrew calendar, which has got nothing to do with the car. Or maybe, if you think of the logo with the Saturn symbol, it's got something to do with it. And as we pass through that phase, we're dealing with this symbolic death, this death of Orion eventually, or the death of Osiris in Egypt, because Orion and Osiris were interchangeable. And the resurrection of Orion is one thing, but also how the goddess plays its part in this symbolism and this journey is also hugely connected to it. And I've seen lots of paintings over the years, paintings that are, I would say, from the Renaissance period or just after the Renaissance period, and they have similar things going on them, similar themes, because a lot of these artists, as I've said in some of my other books, not least Journeys in the Dreamtime, which is I'm currently editing. I'm going to put that out as a new edition later on in the year. These brotherhoods of artists, these painters that knew so much about the pagan symbolism, as well as the ecclesiastical, esoteric and hermetic symbolism, and the Kabbalah. Some of these paintings, like Andrea Magnetta's work, the symbolism of the agony in the garden, also shows similar concepts. And one of the things I've noticed is this symbolism of the three, the Shin in Hebrew, the Trinity. It's all these things that relate to number three. And this three seems to be something that also is connected to the goddess and the Trinity that relates to that. Hence the symbol and the character Trinity in the Matrix movies. It's all part of the same symbolism. You know, the idea of Christ consciousness not really being as effective as it would be without its divine partner, which is the, you know, in the biblical sense would be Magdalena in the story, which was completely and utterly ripped apart by the by Roman Catholicism, and eventually the story was nothing like it was meant to be. So the idea of the goddess and the Christ, the divine feminine and the divine masculine coming together, was hugely significant at this time, the time of spring, the spring equinox. We've just passed through it as we go now into the period which leads to the passing over of the sun and the moon in that period. So, as the goddess is awakening, at this time of year, you know, from the spring equinox, symbolically awakening, and the passage of Orion, as Orion moves on a descent towards a so-called symbolic death to be resurrected eventually, as Osiris being resurrected, and all the symbolism of Egypt that relates to that. But we also have another zodiac which is just as important, which is at the opposite end of Orion, the opposite side of the wheel, the opposite side of Taurus, which would be the area that we would understand as the Scorpio region, which gives us the serpent bearer, or the Ophiuchus, Ascipulus, this figure, this serpent capita of the head of the serpent and the tail of the serpent, which relates to the energies of the earth as well, and to the secrets, which goes back to the secret societies of the serpent holder. And you know that symbol of the serpent wrapped around the T cross that you see in much religious symbolism, not least Judaic symbolism, which relates to Moses, and in Hermetic tradition relates to resurrection, because it's symbolic of this period when, like I said, the goddess is awakening. And there is this opposite in the heavens to the death of Orion, of course. But what's interesting also is the position of the other stars around Orion at that time. And when I was in Malta years ago, and I went into the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist, I was looking at the tombs of some of the Knights of Malta. My God, they had some money, those people. The tombs some of them were gold around them, in golden leaf and all sorts of precious things. And on one of the tombs there was an image of Lepus, the hare, with the 3 stars above it. And the 3 stars were very symbolic of this trinity I just talked about. And also the 3 stars of Orion, the belt stars in some ways. But Lepus as the hare is also Ostara, and is also that archetype for this period again, with the the idea of the hare and the Easter bunny and all those things that you get. The Easter bunny, I love that one. To this understanding of the energy and the triple energy and the trinity and the hare is also the more Celtic myths of Hussein, which is another, or Ossian I should say, was another version of Orion, who wounds the hare, wounds Lepus in the hunt, and the hare takes refuge in a chamber, goes through a doorway into an underground world or an underground kingdom, which is where we get the idea of the Alice in Wonderland and the going into this falling into this underground world, which is in the in the book Alice in Wonderland. There's also the Japanese myths of Inaba and Amaterasu, the goddess Amaterasu, and the goddess of the mountain, and the white rabbit that comes from the underworld to connect with that figure, which is another Alice in Wonderland. Trinity, follow the white rabbit in the Matrix kind of symbolism. But it's amazing how many of these hares or rabbits appear in Renaissance paintings, not least the work of Titan, who painted Jesus and Mary, the baby Jesus with the white rabbit, which is kind of the Easter connection. You've also got Giovanni Bellini, who painted a similar thing with the Cupid and the white rabbit. And you've got all those famous images, Renaissance Italian images of Saint Jerome, the father of Christianity, usually with a lion, but sometimes seen with a white rabbit, which is all connected to this symbolism of the goddess and the connection to the hare, Lepus, who was considered in some ways also a demiurge figure by some of the more ancient indigenous tribes. The hare's got this otherworldliness energy about it. So you have paintings like the one I mentioned by Magtana, the idea of the agony in the garden with the 3 hares, and you have the 3 hares in the ancient pagan sense circling each other, and all this relates to this goddess spiraling energy which seems to spiral in and out of some of these ancient sites, not least the ley lines that run through churches and chapels and cathedrals, all of this is part of this awakening of the goddess, which is very symbolic of the times that we're in as well, especially now as we need this understanding and this healing as part of a journey. So yeah, I'm going to do another video, I think, on the resurrection, the death and resurrection, but I was just thinking of the times that we're in and how that relates to Orion as we move towards Passover. I'm also going to be doing a meditation on the 15th of April, just in time, around the time of Passover, which focuses on peace within. And I'm also going to be doing a couple of other projects that are connected to Iconic as well, very shortly. So if anybody's interested, then don't forget to subscribe, as part, as they say, subscribe to my video channel, and hit that like button. I've always wanted to say that. Yeah, it's so beautiful this time of day. I say that always when I'm up here. Oh, and to also coincide with the so-called symbolic death of Orion and the resurrection in terms of the position of the sun on the zodiac, is also, once we get beyond Easter, we're into this period of leading towards the summer solstice, and that is symbolic of the feast of St. John in the Masonic tradition, but it's also the birth date of John the Baptist, which is why the Knights and the orders, the Brotherhood, the Knights of St. John, the Knights of Malta, were so focused on these pagan movements connected to the stars and the mysteries of Orion and the mysteries of the serpent holder. All these areas are all connected. And I'll just say this, thing. I went into the Knights of Malta Cathedral, and I mean, I went there to see the Caravaggio painting of St. John the Baptist, because St. John, or the John archetype, is very something that's very connected to my heart in many ways. I feel a connection to that. And I went in there wearing my Cathar bandana, the one with the patir, with the Maltese cross on there, the original one, the one from that period, which became the flag of the Occitane. And you know, this business about masks and things, you know, this idea of wearing something, I put that into practice when I went into the cathedral, because they were making everybody take off their headgear or their hoods or their hats as they went in, as a mark of respect. Just as these people were making people wear masks as they entered shops through the COVID era, still going on in places like Scotland as I make this video, which is ludicrous, but that's another subject. But I refused to take my headscarf off. I refused the security, and I refused them, and I stood my ground, and I asked them to tell me whether they understood what the symbol meant. And you know, I say this purely because for me it was symbolic of standing in your power. It's not about disrespect of a holy place, because the holy place is the temple, and the temple is also my body. My temple was entering into the temple grounds of this particular cathedral. It could be any cathedral, it wouldn't matter. And therefore I stood my ground as a sovereign being, and I explained that I would not be removing my connection through this to the place that I was entering. And it's funny, you know, when you stand in your sovereignty, and you stand your ground, and you become the lion that you're meant to be, depending on the circumstances, of course, what generally happens is most people just subside, and they allow you to be who you want to be, depending on the person you're dealing with, of course. Depends on who they are. But I refuse to diminish my light for the sake of somebody else's fears and insecurities and rules and regulations. And I would remember that in all circumstances when people ask you to do things which are not true to you, for you to actually stand your ground and be the light that you are intended to be. Because if you don't, then you are saying simply that you are not sovereign. So when you stand your ground and you stand in your sovereignty in all circumstances with an essence of peace within yourself, knowing who you are, you're saying that you are part of the land. You are of the stars. You have the fire of the sun within yourself and the luminous dreamlike qualities of the moon. All of these energies exist within you. They're all part of you. Just as we can map that through, to a certain extent, through, the zodiac, and we understand star signs and all of those things. That's just one level of it. The deeper level and understanding of our sovereignty comes from the light within. The heaven within and the feeling of peace within is part of that. So, when you hear the terms or the sayings of the light of the world is actually a light that is a light that exists beyond the world but filters into this world through our existence as spirits walking in a material reality. They're not separate things, they're connected. And it's at this time when the earth is awakening, when the earth is stirring again, the hibernation is over and the sleep is coming to an end. For a lot of animals, especially like the bear, I've talked about that in other videos, then this is now the time to blend back into that feeling of the light. Anyway, hold that light within. Feel it in your heart. Keep yourself connected to the source, to the center of all things. And I will see you very shortly. I'll talk to you about death and resurrection.